Hi, I'm Jordan Travis, and I'm dedicated to inspire more harmony through harmony by building stronger communities, creating life changing experiences, and providing top notch educational opportunities, all through music and singing. And today, I'm extremely excited to launch Live with Jordan Travis as a way to chat with other incredible people who are changing the singing world for the better. Joining me tonight is one of the most multifaceted musicians I've had the pleasure of working with. As a singer, he's performed with the Nathaniel Dett Chorale, Hampton 4, Atrocity. From 2003 to 2006, toured around the world with Canada's premier vocal band, Cadence. He currently tours the world with his partner Suba in Free Play Duo, and this has led to some amazing performing opportunities with people like Bobby McFerrin, performances for Nelson Mandela and Oscar Peterson, and also at the Canadian Embassy in Washington for the inauguration of Obama. In addition to that, he's written everything as a composer from opuses to rock songs, and he's actually been awarded the John Lennon International Songwriting Award as a Best Song in 2005, a Contemporary A Cappella Award for Best Rock Song in 2006, and his arrangements have been performed all over the world. And in fact, he actually wrote the book on a cappella arranging with Guru Sharing called A Cappella Arranging. And if that isn't enough, in addition to all that, he's an educator, he's a coach, and he's really well known as a producer. He's worked with groups like the Swingle Singers, Cadence, in terms of recordings, and the Nylons. Please welcome Dylan Bell. Dylan, it's great to have you here with me.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I know we were chatting not long ago, and you were down, was it in Brazil? You were in South America.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, and you were performing with Suba with Free Play Duo down there?
That one was originally planned to be a tour, but we weren't able to get the gigs together, so we turned it into a vacation instead.
That's awesome. And I know that you posted a really cool video on Facebook and probably other socials just with the two of you trying desperately to get a flight home, because that was kind of the beginning of all of this pandemic.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. Now, you know, you have performed all over the world as a singer in a variety of groups. Are there any cultures outside of North America that really kind of speak to you and influenced you as an arranger or a singer?
I'd say, in terms of different cultures that influenced me musically, I'd say, well, I was down in Brazil recently. Brazilian music has definitely been a huge pull for me, and I love music from Brazil and Latin music as well. Music from India, partly because of Suba's background. Her father's a professor at York University, and before I was her husband, I was his student. And so I learned a bunch from him. And Suba and I also perform in a world music ensemble called Auto Rickshaw. I'm the bass player in that band. African music, through my experiences with the Nathaniel Dett Chorale and some of the African groups that I produced. I did a CD with a group called Soul Influence and learned a lot about Pan-African styles of music from them, plus amazing musicians in Toronto, such as Kobina Aqua Harrison and Walid Abdul Hamid. And I'd say those are sort of the small number of them, but really just anything I can find just really interests me, and I want to absorb as much of it as I can.
And the interesting thing that like thinking of those three cultures a little bit, and music, obviously rhythm is and kind of the underlying beat is a huge part of those cultures. Is that something that drives you, or is it everything? Just learning about different cultures and the music and how that influences you.
It's very true that they all have rhythm as a core, so I'm pretty sure that's got to be a pretty strong part of it. Anything that has that kind of drive really interests me, and also they approach music in an entirely different way in many ways from the Western approach to music. So what I find I love about the music is that I learned different ways of understanding music. As much as just the music itself, it's the approach to it, how they come to the music, how they learn the music.
Can you actually elaborate a little bit on that? Like what are some things that you feel like, especially their approach to music, what are some things that really strike you from your experiences?
I'll start with Indian music because of those, it's probably the one I have the most familiarity with. Each one of these musics does not have a written tradition. So it's an oral tradition. It's passed down.
Yeah.
And then when you're learning the music, you learn it by call and response. You learn it by repeating. You learn by watching and following masters. So there's a very strong lineage that comes down. Pretty much all of these traditions, but definitely true with the music of India. And so the musician is not just sort of a passive recipient of the music, but they actually have to internalize it. So whereas a classical musician can take the music off the page, have tremendous skills in order to be able to execute the music, with these musics you actually have to put them inside you first, and then they have to come out of you. So in a way, I sort of feel like you're even more deeply involved in the music.
Yeah, it feels like it's streaming through you, and like you said, it's just a deeper. Would you say a deeper understanding of the music, or just a deeper feeling, like in your core?
A little bit of both. I mean, European things, you have to have an incredible understanding of the music in order to be able to execute it properly. So less depth of understanding and more you being involved in it very directly and very viscerally, I would say.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I mean, earlier you were talking about, we were kind of chatting a little bit before the interview began, and you were saying that you're spending a little bit of time learning a new instrument. And I know that, not only are you the singer and performer that way, but of course you play many different instruments. But it seems like learning is a huge passion for you and a motivator for you. Like, what are you learning about right now? What is pushing you?
There's a few different things. So you're right. Learning, I always need to be learning something new. I'm never happy unless I'm taking in new things. So for the first time in 30 years, I decided I wanted to learn a new instrument. I already play a few. I'm going to just show you what this instrument looks like.
Yeah, I totally want to see this. I'm going to have a little slurp of coffee while...
All right. This instrument is called a Chapman stick. And it's called that because it really kind of looks like a stick. It's just a fretboard with no body attached to it. And the way it's played, you unfortunately won't be able to hear it here because it's an electrical instrument, needs to be plugged in, is instead of using one hand and then strumming with the other hand the way you would with a guitar, you actually just tap on the strings like this.
That's so interesting.
And what it means is that instead of being able to play one set of notes, you actually are able to play two separate sets of notes with your hand, much like the two hands of a piano. And you can see there's a big fat string in the middle. This side is the left-hand side, which is all the bass stuff. And this side is the right-hand side, which is more like a guitar. So it's kind of like playing a couple of instruments in one. So this thing is...
It seems like it reminds me of a multi-fretted bass. I mean, when I'm looking at it, but it has that percussive nature to it. And also the piano, well, I guess piano is percussion, right, in essence with your fingers, but it has that. That's really interesting.
It's a fascinating instrument. There's a guy named Tony Levin who played with Peter Gabriel and often played that instead of playing a bass. It has a very unique tone to it. And but it's an instrument with, you can play classical music on it. I've heard people playing Bach on it. You can play hard rock music on it. You can play jazz on it.
Is this like a relatively new instrument in the grand scheme of things, or
it's in the grand scheme of things? Yes, I think it was invented about 40 or 50 years ago.
Okay.
But it's a very sort of niche instrument because it is kind of, it's been a while since a new instrument has really been created.
Yeah.
So there's a small number of very devoted people who play this instrument quite well. And so I thought, I've been fascinated with this instrument for many years, and now everybody's got the time.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, do you think that you're delving into this now because of the physical distancing and that you have a little bit more time to devote to it? Or do you think you'd be doing this right now if there wasn't that happening?
I'd be doing it right now, but I wouldn't be able to work as hard on it. So I bought the instrument about 1.5 years ago, and whenever I'm off the road and can scrape together a couple of hours here and there, I would spend time practicing this instrument. But now I can be at it every day.
So just out of curiosity, how much time are you devoting to it right now? About.
I'd say on average about 2 to 3 hours a day.
Wow, that's amazing.
On this, yeah. And then in addition to that, I'm spending time learning new skills such as I was mentioning to you before. I'm learning how to do live streaming concerts.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Sue and I as a duo.
In fact, shameless plug. Totally talk about that because I know you and Suba are going to be doing some concerts.
That's correct. So my wife Suba and I am very lucky to be quarantined with my only other bandmate. So we have a band called Free Play. We're an a cappella live looping duo. So we're using it's the two of us just performing by ourselves, but
Yeah.
sometimes we use live looping technology to allow ourselves to record ourselves and perform simultaneously with that. It's a very sort of complex form of live vocal arranging. Because we're quarantined together, we're able to continue our performing, and we're doing so with a live streaming concert series called Free Play Fridays at 4.
Awesome.
That's exactly what it is. It's going to be a 1-hour show every second Friday.
Were you saying
4
this
p.m.
this upcoming Friday will be your first? Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes.
So,
And
check
we've
that out.
decided to open the gate. So normally we are specifically an a cappella vocal duo.
Yeah.
But we thought since with this thing will probably go on, we'll probably add some of the many instruments that we play, including guitar, percussion, possibly the stick, some bass, all these
Awesome.
sort of other things. So every week is going to be something different. You won't be hearing the same concert every time.
That's
We'll try to
awesome.
keep it new every
That's
time.
awesome. What a great opportunity for us to connect with you as well. That's awesome. Are there any other projects or things that you are focusing on during this time? Like you're probably devoting a lot of your learning to the stick because it seems like it's a pretty intense instrument.
It does take a lot of time, yeah.
yeah.
But in addition to that, musically speaking, Suba and I have been talking for 6 months to a year or so about our follow-up album to our most recent one. We put it on an album in 2018 called Go Back Forward, and that is the album that we have been touring around the world with. By the way, Free Play is at freeplayduo.com.
Perfect.
Our YouTube channel is, it's got a funny name, but if you type in Free Play Duo Acapella YouTube, we will show up.
Awesome.
And so we have decided that we're going to take some time later on in a couple of months to write and record our next album because, as you can see behind me, we have our own recording studio as well.
Yeah, and I might chat about this later. I've had the pleasure of being in the studio and working with you, and it's fantastic. It's wonderful. Now, we talked a lot about different instruments and things like that. How do you find, other than the stick, I know you play bass and piano and keyboard and probably a ton of other instruments, but I would imagine that those are kind of your mainstays.
Those would be my core. So what I consider the instruments I hire myself out on are piano, bass, and voice.
Awesome.
And then the other ones I get called to play guitar. Sometimes I play drums and other things, but those are
your mainstays. How has your experience with the instrumental work influenced your the acapella world? Like maybe you're arranging, or maybe it's your singing. But how has kind of living in that instrumental world affected the acapella world for you?
Well, it's really fascinating because when you play instruments, you get a deeper sense of the role that instrument plays in the particular type of music that you're doing. So, for example, in a lot of contemporary a cappella styles, the voices are being asked to represent what instruments would do. Either they're designed to sound like instruments, or they're designed to do what an instrument would have done in that band. So if you think of a bass singer who's singing, I can think of how a bass player would articulate specific notes, what kind of rhythms they would use, what kind of phrasing they would use. In fact, it reminds me of a story. There was a wonderful singer who used to sing with the Swingles who just recently passed away named Toby Hoag.
Yeah.
And I was producing a record with the Swingles some time ago, and he wanted to figure out how to approach the bass line for a version they were doing of the Beach Boys' God Only Knows. And so he asked me to record myself playing bass to the track, and then he went and transcribed what I did and brought it back, learned the transcription, and sang it just like that because it had very specific idiomatic things that a singer wouldn't could do, but wouldn't necessarily think of doing unless they knew the instrument.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And do you? I mean, that's one aspect. I'm sure there's many aspects, but this kind of leads me to another question, which is I've had the opportunity to sing some of your arrangements. In addition, I've had and I'm sure people out there have as well, and I've had the opportunity to work with you where, you've produced 2 of the CDs from Supertonic, a quartet I sing with, and, while you're working with us, oftentimes when we were doing instrumental sounds and things like that, you were tweaking and coaching, and even in your arrangements, writing it with specific syllables to maybe elicit specific sounds or specific responses. But what techniques or philosophy do you have in terms of instrument sounds? Like, there's a lot of people out there that are singing contemporary a cappella, and they may not have a grasp on how to make and manufacture some of those sounds to mimic instruments.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of the idea, and sometimes when you mention about what you write in a chart for, sometimes I won't write the words because I'm afraid if I write jank, 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 somebody will say the words jank, 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 and sound rather silly. So the idea is that you think of it less about the sound. Well, you think about the sound and you think about the function. So, for example, if I wanted to sound like a trumpet, I'll start by analyzing, well, is a trumpet high or low? Well, it's high. Is it a sharp sound or a mellow sound? It's usually fairly bright sounding. Is it percussive or is it smooth? You think of it as being smooth. You put those sort of things together. Does it play over a big wide range, or does it kind of sit in one range a little bit? It tends to sit in one range. You put those things together, high, fairly bright, and long tones. That kind of thing. And then what I do is I just imagine what that instrument sounds like in my head. And so when I'm playing trumpet, I'm thinking about Miles Davis. I'm thinking about classical trumpet playing that I've heard, but usually just my heart just kind of goes to jazz primarily.
Yeah, for sure.
So I start thinking about that. If I'm thinking about a guitar, I remind myself, well, range-wise, it's all over the place. Sound-wise, it's very mid-heavy, so it's not very round. It's a little bit more broad and a little bit cutting. It usually has a percussive sound, so you put a kind of sound in front of it.
Yeah.
You get. Think about things like slides that a guitar would do. Things like vibrato that you hear. And so you put all those things together, and then you just kind of. It's less about thinking about how I'm making my mouth go and just being the instrument rather than
trying to manipulate to but I love that you ask those questions, like not you didn't just say, okay, what does a guitar sound like, but you kind of defined parts of it. Like, is this a percussive, does it have more of a percussive edge to it? Is it softer and smoother? Does it have, is it bright? Like, is it really bright? Is it rounder? Is it mid? Like, you're answering or asking yourself these questions. So it seems like, and chances are, you're not really asking these things anymore of yourself, because you've done it so many times. But it sounds like, if I was to define those things to 3 or 4, right? It sounds like thinking about not just the sound of the instrument, but is it percussive? Is it smooth? Is it, is it really treble or high, mid, low, warm, rich?
Yeah.
What are some other things that?
If I was to break it down, what I would really, when I teach this to ensembles, for example, and I say they say, how do we make the sound of this? I say, pitch range, high or low. Articulation, is it percussive or is it smooth?
Yeah.
Timbre, is it bright or is it round? And I sort of break it down about 3 or 4 different things like that, and then that gets everybody thinking about things like, well, and it seems obvious. If I want to be a trumpet, I'm not going to go ta 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 or ka ka ka. I'm going to go blah 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 like that. These are in a way they're second nature when you've been doing them for a lot, and then if you just take a moment, they're actually kind of common sense. It's a reminder to everybody that they know more about music than they think they do, and they have been listening to music all their life. So if you say, what's the sound of a trumpet? You could recognize it from a mile away. Then it's just one small step from hearing that sound in your head and being able to find a way of making that sound yourself.
Yeah. Now, while we've been chatting, you kind of defined a trumpet and you played with that sound a little bit. Guitar, and that was a lot of fun. Earlier, you did something on bass. Just for fun, for any listener out there, can you play with a few different instruments, other instruments that you may have imitated over the years?
Sure. Well, the one people often ask about actually is the drums. And the way I think about drums is I think about a drum kit and the elements of it. So you have a kick drum, it's the one you play with your foot, like that. You have the snare drum, it's a little more complicated. And then you have the hi-hats. You take those three elements together. And you think about what a drummer would do. They do downbeats and backbeats, and they drive the music forward. And you just take those three sounds, and 90% of what I would do if I'm doing a drummer is just those three sounds in different combinations.
Different combinations of those sounds, and yeah, so that sounds like the basically the backbone of beatboxing.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is super, super cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. If I was to do something like, it's a variation on the trumpet, but one that I like is the one that Miles Davis used to use, which is called the muted trumpet. And for that one, it's where they put a metal thing in the front and it makes it very, very, very thin. So we've already talked about the idea of it being high, not a sharp articulation. There's one more thing you do, which is instead of ha, 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 kind of an open tone like that, is I think of saying ooh with the umlaut, like that. And then I use my head voice as a male singer, and then I put a little articulation in front of it.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome. And and it really, like, if I closed my eyes, I can really hear that instrument. I can hear the like you said, it's the timbre of the instrument, it's the feel of the instrument, and I can totally hear that in the voice. That's fantastic. And I know that a lot of people sing in groups and probably are worried about being that group that says da 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 or jank 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 or whatever the case may be. And I find it just so much more rich when we add those sounds. And when we listen to our maybe favorite a cappella groups, they often can imitate those sounds. So it sounds like a band with a soloist or with a duet or trio, you know. That's awesome. That's really awesome. Just on kind of down that path of your arrangements and things that you have done, can you talk about maybe some of your arranging process? And other than, hey, I just want a song done by Dylan Bell, I'm going to email him and say, can you arrange this song? But more for those people that are aspiring arrangers. What would be some of their some tips that you would have for them, especially in the a cappella or contemporary a cappella genre?
Okay. Well, I'm going to start with a couple of sort of overarching philosophical things, and then I'm going to tell you what I call the 10 steps in 2 minutes or less.
I love it.
So, and yes, you'll be able to do this in 2 minutes. So it's actually deep. And I credit Deke for breaking it down into these 10 steps. It's actually really wonderful when we wrote the book.
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is when you're writing something, always imagine it coming out of the mouth of your singers. Because if you do that, it will automatically help you create the parameters that you know are going to work. So if you know your bass singer's range, if you know what your soprano does really well but doesn't do really well, you won't ask them to do things that are too unreal. Next thing, always, when you're writing an arrangement, sing through every line yourself. If you can't get it right within the first 3 times, rewrite it. Because if you know how you want it to go and it's hard for you, then it's probably too hard for your singers.
That's interesting.
It's just very practical things. When you choose a song, choose something that your group wants. You might want to choose something that is a hole in your set. If you have lots of slow tunes and you need something jumpy, then consider that.
Yeah.
Listen to the version that you want to borrow from a million times until you can practically press play on your head, and the thing will play. So you can hear it forwards, backwards, side to side.
Yeah.
That said, you don't necessarily want to rigidly follow every single piece of it. You might want to alter form. In a cappella music, it's much more demanding for the listener. So you don't have 30-second instrumental solos in a cappella music.
Yeah.
You get more. So you might want to consider manipulating the form. A simple rule of thumb. There's a reason why 4-part harmony came out 400 years ago or so. You have your melody, you have your bass, which sometimes we call our second melody, and then we have 2 pieces left over, or more pieces if you want them. 4 is kind of a golden number.
Yeah.
Bass, melody, and 2 background singers. who are sort of covering whatever is not being covered by the other thing. Now, if you think about barbershop works in that way, but everybody's doing the same thing. So you have your lead, you have your bass, your tenor up, and your baritone.
Just to pay homage, today is actually National Barbershop Quartet Day.
Oh, awesome! So hello to all the barbershop quartets.
So that's really cool. But yeah, absolutely. It's a lot more homorhythmic and homophonic in texture than a lot of contemporary a cappella music.
Okay. So contemporary basically separates out the pieces a little bit. So all those parts are covered in a barbershop thing, but everybody does more or less the same way at the same time. This way you take the melody out, you take the bass, and make them two different things, and then you fill in the middle, and that's where you can decide. That's where all the interesting stuff is. So they can do everything from oohs and ahs to doo-wop shabops, which is where doo-wop comes from. Mm-hmm. It can be something where it's borrowing from the instrumental tradition, and so you've got something that sounds like a guitar, or things that sound like keyboards or whatever.
Yeah.
You can start making those decisions. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to fill out your harmony really nicely with those 4 parts, or it might be 6 or 7 or 8 parts, and the real difference is that middle can have 4 parts like this or 2 parts like that.
So in essence, it becomes a thicker texture or a bigger band that you're working with, and unless you decide to put like a duet kind of thing going on, a melody and maybe a harmonization of the melody. But yeah, it just sounds like it's just a bigger texture.
That's right. Or you could have more textures. So if you're writing for a larger group, when collegiate groups work sometimes, they'll have 3 singers over here who are covering a guitar part, and they'll have 3 singers over here covering a background vocal part.
Yeah.
And 3 singers over here who are covering horn. So I sing in a group that has 8 singers. It's called Atrocity, and it does all music from the top 40 1980s.
Yeah.
And so naturally, that's a very instrumental. It's got synthesizers and guitars and things like this. And so with the 8 voices, our mission is to cover all those parts.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. What, just out of curiosity, do you trade all the time, or do you kind of own your instrument?
We trade all the time. So usually the bass singer is usually the bass, just by nature of the fact that he's the guy who can do that.
Yeah.
Usually 1 or 2 of us tend to be the most specialized drummers, and so we'll take care of that. Certain people, we're sort of tied a little bit to range, so anything that's a really squeaky high part is going to be sung by our top soprano, but less you're always a guitar and you're always a synthesizer.
Yeah, that's fair.
More like you're somewhere in this stack, but today this stack is guitars, and today this stack is synthesizers.
Yep.
And that changes piece to piece.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And I mean, I think it makes it so much more rich. You know, when you're listening, I've had the pleasure of hearing Atrocity, and when you're listening to it, it's just such a rich texture. And like you said, it really does imitate a band. You know, you really start to get that sense. But it's really cool just to see voices up there instead.
Oh, it's so much fun.
And you guys have done some like Atrocity like karaoke stuff too, where you'll get other singers where you basically are the band. And they sing. It's amazing to see. Amazing.
We have so much fun with that for a couple of things. One is it allows us to tear down that wall between the audience and the band. It's very, very empowering for the people who get to come up, and we get to help them out, and we get to support them, and they love it. And every once in a while, somebody will call a song that we don't know, and then we have to figure out how it goes on the fly. And if we're lucky, one guy will go, "I know the bass part." Somebody will say, "I know the guitar part," and then the rest of us will kind of try to figure out what's going on, or follow that guy doing the guitar. And so there's a little bit of spontaneity that goes on with it as well.
Well, and in addition, who doesn't like great 80s music? I mean...
Oh, yeah.
You got it all of it covered. Oh, that's fantastic. Now, earlier on when we were chatting, you were talking about maybe starting a new recording project with Free Play Duo, since you're both home, and that you recorded... You know, that CD in 2018, and now, hey, you're looking at a new one. And I have had the pleasure of recording a couple of CDs with you, and it's been a really interesting process. And I'm wondering if you would talk through a little bit of your recording process, because that might be of interest for people. They may not be able to do it themselves, but it may be interesting if they ever want to work with you in the future.
Well, it really depends on the type of music that we're doing. So,
Sure.
for example, when we worked with Supertonic, Jordan's quartet, we wanted to capture the natural feeling of a live performance, but we wanted to have the precision of studio performance. So what we did was we had all four members in the same room at the same time, so they could feel each other, they could phrase together, which of course is the essence of good barbershop singing, singing with the same ring, which you wouldn't do if you're singing alone by yourself.
Hmm.
We recorded everybody together, but something that I did was I played piano along with them, and that was to make sure that the intonation stayed 100% on. If the song had a rhythmic or groove base, sometimes we would record to a click track, which allowed the group to make sure that they stayed in the same rhythm. We use that as what we call a bed track, and then I had each of the singers come in afterwards and basically replace their old part with this new part. And what it meant was when they were in the studio by themselves, it meant that each singer still felt the other singer singing with them.
Yeah.
And they were just, in a sense, replicating their performance, but we could start and stop and do as much little minutia and detail as much as we wanted, so we could get one perfect take from start to finish.
And what I absolutely love about your recording is, and we were just super proud of it. But I love the fact that you don't hear Melodyne or the artifacts or it seems like the way that you're doing it. It's not that pitch correction maybe wasn't used, but it used so sparingly because of the way you've recorded it that it sounds real. It sounds natural. One of the things that I've been finding when I'm listening to even not just barbershop, but contemporary a cappella and professional groups, it's just how robotic it's starting to sound and over manipulated, and I miss the essence of the voice sometimes.
It breaks my heart, and I cannot stand the sound of hyper-tuned singing of any genre. And barbershop is the last place it should be in, because the aesthetic is about that natural ring,
Yeah.
which you can lose. Yes, and so because that's sort of my own aesthetic, is it should sound as natural as possible. A lot of the process is about just getting the best performance out of the singer as possible,
Yeah.
and then what you get is something that is already, instead of taking something from here and using technology to try to get it to here, you take your time to get it right, get it here, and it helps if you have wonderful singers such as yourself.
Oh, you guys you're too kind.
And there's not much left to do, and then it sounds like a natural performance, because for all intents and purposes, is an idealized version of a natural performance.
Is this a process that you use with other artists, other like contemporary a cappella artists, or other artists that you've recorded with in the past?
This one was one that was more specific to working with Supertonic and other barbershop groups that I've worked with, because of that requirement of having the natural flow, having the natural feel, and having the four singers. I do believe that feelings make it on a tape, and so the natural feeling of you're singing with your bandmates in a room is something special. For something that's a bit more of a contemporary approach, for example, it might be a little drier of an approach, where you might get one singer at a time singing in a room to listening to a piano track or something like that, and then listening to a click track. When I worked with the Nylons, we did it slightly differently, where in order for them to be able to know how the parts went and for us to be able to get the sound of one singer at a time, I recorded all their parts. And so they had a guide track, but it was all Dylan. and then each one of them would replace their parts, and eventually it was all Nylons.
That's so interesting. And what about your experience with the Swingle Singers?
Swingle Singers was a wonderful experience. It helps that they're sort of top-notch singers, and so for the contemporary pieces, it was very often just a matter of individual singers coming in and singing along to a guide piano track and click track. For the pieces that had a solid tempo feel, where you could put a click track in, and because they're such professional sight-reading singers, they could just look at their part, and they've already rehearsed, so they already know how they want it to sound. But that level of singer is usually able to replicate something quite well between singing with the real people and singing it in sort of an isolated environment. But there were a couple of pieces that we did, a couple of their more free ballad pieces, where we used the same approach that we use with Supertonic.
Yeah.
The idea of getting them all in a room singing together with a little bit of pitch reference material, and then replacing their parts one at a time.
That's so cool. That's so cool. And I mean, this kind of leads me down the path of you know, you've had the opportunity. You're a professional musician. You work with professional musicians. You also work with amateurs. I know that you've conducted many groups. Suba conducts groups, and I know that you're involved as well, somewhat. And you know, so do you notice any patterns in personality or dedication or anything between amateurs and professionals?
I saw that question come down, and I found it an interesting one because it's hard to describe. I mean, it's one thing I think is very important in this situation. When people say amateur and professional, they often mean not. They think they mean not good and good, but that is of course a misnomer.
Yeah.
When we say professional, we mean somebody who does it for money.
Yes.
And an amateur comes from the word for love. And so when you think about amateurs, they bring heart and they bring spirit and they bring a joy to it that professionals at the best of times bring, and you want them to bring it. Sometimes professionals will come with a sense of it being a job, and because it's their job and they take it professionally, they tend to show up very prepared. They know what they're supposed to do, and if they are professionals at a certain caliber, they're just that much more prepared because they have spent their entire lives building the practices that make them know how to put something together.
Absolutely.
An amateur is just really somebody who has less experience, and so sometimes they don't necessarily know the same ways of practicing, but they're no less devoted. But they may just be. It's like amateur sports and professional sports. If you spend your entire life training for something, you will just be doing it at this level. If you're an amateur who likes to go out and play sports once a week, you'll be doing it at a different level, but you'll bring a different thing to it. You just bring a love of the game.
Yeah, I always, I don't know. Sometimes I think I would take a passionate amateur over, a professional. But I know many professionals who are equally as passionate. But I definitely would take a passionate amateur over a professional who's just kind of mailing it in any day. But I think that's kind of anything. I would always take somebody who's passionate about something than someone who's just mailing it in.
The passion and the enthusiasm is worth more than the skill. And the more we do this, the more we recognize you just want to be making music with people you love making music with. And so take that to a group level, and you can tell the groups who have heart and they love singing with each other and they get joy out of it versus the ones who are maybe just doing it to win a competition, or they have whatever their ulterior goal is, where some people are just in it for the love of it. And that comes off stage. Like, you can feel that as an audience member on stage.
I agree 100%. And we've all seen those and seen those performances that really hit us. And oddly enough, it's not always the best. It's not always technically the best performance, but sometimes when people perform from the heart, you forgive certain technical flaws for just the beauty of and the love that they're giving.
Absolutely. Ultimately, what we're doing here is we're communicating. We're communicating energy. And just because you have the best vocabulary doesn't mean that you can communicate the greatest love.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, at the beginning, I kind of talked about how multifaceted you are as a performer, as a composer, arranger, as I said performer already, educator, producer. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And in addition to all of this, you're also the artistic director of the Sing Festival.
That's right.
In Toronto. I want to make sure that we touch on that. So can you talk a little bit about the Sing Festival for those who may not have heard of it or have not experienced it yet?
Absolutely. Well, myself and my wife, Suba Shankaran, are the co-artistic directors of, full name is SING, the Toronto Vocal Arts Festival. It's now in its 9th season. It is Canada's only fully a cappella vocal festival.
That's awesome.
And we're very, very proud of what we've done. We've had the chance over the years to bring in the greatest names in a cappella for groups like Take Six and Naturally Seven, the real group, the Ryaton. We pride ourselves in having a very, very broad range of music. So you'll hear music from different countries, but you'll hear jazz and you'll hear pop and you'll hear barbershop and you'll hear classical, rather than trying to keep it narrow to a very specific type of music. We really do believe we have something for everyone. And we also have opportunities for singers to participate in a couple of ways. We have outdoor programming where we program local community groups in addition to professional groups. We have professional workshops where we bring in some of the best people in the world to come work with you and teach you. We also have an event called the Mass Choir event, which we did last year, and we loved doing it. And the Mass Choir event is basically an opportunity for individuals or ensembles to register and sign up, become part of the Mass Choir, and then they get to work with a very top-level professional artist. And in our upcoming Sing Festival, which is planned now for the end of September, we hope. And that's the plan so far. We're still waiting on confirmation, and we have to see how the winds take us. But if we do this, our high-level Mass Choir leader is going to be none other than yourself, Mr. Jordan Travis, with Super Tonic.
It's been really awesome to not only take part in the Sing Festival over the past few years, but especially in the beginning, where I wasn't necessarily part of it as a performer, but kind of taking in some of these amazing performances of groups that, I've had to use YouTube, or maybe if they came close to coming to Toronto, make the drive and see them. But, bringing that kind of caliber in has been phenomenal. And that, just so all the listeners out there, it's usually in May. So this festival's usually in May. And of course, right now we're all dealing with the COVID pandemic, and everything's been canceled and postponed, I should say. And so we're really hoping that works out in September. I think that would be phenomenal. But of course, we're all kind of waiting.
Well, and in the meantime, Suba and I have been producing a radio program. A virtual radio program called Sing Radio. Sing Radio can be found at a website called Maple Music Cafe. And we run it twice a week. It broadcasts on Thursday nights 8, Saturday nights at 7. We do a brand new 20-minute podcast every week, and it's also available as a podcast. You can find the details about that at singtoronto.com.
That's awesome.
And we've had lots of our favorite Canadian a cappella groups, including, of course, Supertonic, as part of our playlist. We just wrapped our 45th episode.
As if you don't have enough to do, right? Let's run a radio show.
Let's run a radio show. Why not?
I love it. And I love that, I love that you bring so much to the masses. I love that you personally perform at an incredibly high level, but I love that you bring so much to all of us too. And so this kind of leads me to my last question, and this is going to be the question that I kind of end with, I think, all of these interviews, but it's what impact do you want to have on the world? And I think you might be creating more of that impact already, but just wanted to put that out there.
I want the world to experience joy and happiness, and my language for doing that is music. And so anything I can do to bring that out to people, and that might be as an artist through my own performances, it might be through my work as an arranger, it might be through my work enabling other people to make their music as a producer or as a vocal coach or as an educator, anything that I can do to bring joy through my favorite language of music, my religion of music. That is basically, in essence, the impact I want to have.
That is so awesome. That is just really awesome. And I think that you do this so much already, which is wonderful. I know that I have been impacted by your work and working with you, and I know other people have exactly the same feelings. But I love that you don't give up. You've done that. You've made that impact, and you're going, you know what? How can I make more impact? How can I do even further? How can I reach more people? And that's just fantastic. Dylan, it's just, I love the fact that we got, a little bit of time, a sliver of your time so that we can chat. And I know people are going to love listening and watching this so that they can just take in what you have to offer. And I just want to thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Jordan. It really has been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, I just want to say congrats to both you and Suba. I know you had an anniversary recently, and
yes.
I know that time together is really important. And so congratulations. and here's to many, many more celebrations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.